Hello and welcome to the In Publishing podcast. My name is James Evelegh and I'm the editor of In Publishing. My guest this time is Gavin Thompson, Newsquest's regional editor for Wales, where he is the editor of The National, a new digital title launched last year. He is also the editor of the South Wales Argus, the Barry and District News and Penarth Times. In our chat, we mainly talked about The National. Gavin tells us why there was a need for a new Wales-focused title.
A lot of people were getting their news, getting their information from news sources and news outlets that weren't really paying a lot of attention to what was happening in Wales, so they would be getting the wrong information. So that made it really, really clear that what we already wanted to do was something that we felt became even more important.
He talks about some of the challenges they faced in year one.
You can't just focus on subscriptions. You need people to find your content too. People have got to be able to see it before they'll pay for it. So you've got to get it visible.
And the improving outlook for the regional press as a whole.
There's been I think a change in perhaps faith in the sector. I think we've reached a bit of a tipping point in a number of the publishers where actually the growth is starting from new areas and audience growth is starting to offset the declines. You know, the companies will be smaller than they were 10 years ago, but they're starting to become growth businesses again, and that's really exciting.
Amongst many other things. Before we hear more from Gavin, a quick word about our valued sponsors. We would like to thank our podcast sponsor, Air Business, a market leader in distribution and subscription management services for the publishing industry. Its end-to-end service includes subscriber acquisition and marketing strategy, worldwide distribution, digital mail and e-commerce fulfillment, and warehouse and freight logistics. For more information, visit airbusiness.com. Gavin Thompson, welcome to the In Publishing podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Gavin, you're the editor of The National, which is a brand for Wales, which launched just under a year ago. Could you give us a bit more information about the brand, why you launched it, what was the gap in the market, and what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, of course. So I guess everything, whenever you launch a new product or anything, you talk about what's the problem you're trying to solve, or as you say, the gap in the market. I think for us, the problem we were looking to fix was a lack of strength in the Welsh media market from the point of view of news outlets telling Welsh news, from a Welsh perspective. So a lot of people in Wales would be getting their primary source of news might be things like Mail Online or UK-based news sites. Nothing wrong with that. But when you look at the maturity of the news market in Wales versus Scotland, for example, there was just no comparison. If you look at Scotland, you would have strong Scottish titles like the Daily Record, like the Scotsman and the Herald, which is one of our titles in Newsquest, as well as the if you like, London-based or UK-based nationals have strong Scottish editions too. The Sun in Scotland would be quite a different read to the Sun in England. Wales didn't really have that. It has a strong local media, which Newsquest is a key part of, but it didn't have the same depth of national media. And not to say that there was none, but there was a real lack of depth in there, and we felt that there was a problem there. And that really, the problem was there before, but when the pandemic started, it really, really stood out because the rules were different. The laws are different in Wales to in England, and that really stood out during the time when we had different restrictions. Well, we still do. And a lot of people were getting their news, getting their information from news sources and news outlets that weren't really paying a lot of attention to what was happening in Wales, so they would be getting the wrong information. So that made it really, really clear that what we already wanted to do was something that we felt became even more important.
And why do you think Wales traditionally has not had the same, or I should say the UK nationals, they have their Scottish editions. Why did they not have Welsh editions as well? Was it because Scotland has a larger population, or was there something else?
Yeah, Scotland is a larger population, so it's a bigger market. That's true, but I think sometimes these things just happen because they happen. So the UK nationals didn't need to have the strong Welsh editions because there wasn't so much competition pushing them, down that road. And I think the more competition there is, the more diverse news media there is in Wales, the better. So actually, since we've launched, we've seen other companies investing a bit more in Wales. Not saying that that's directly because of us, but I think we're starting to see a more competitive Welsh media landscape, and that's a good thing.
And who is the title aimed at? I've looked at the site. It's quite serious in tone. It's big, heavy on political coverage and culture and the issues like that. Who are you aiming at? Who's your demographic?
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. We describe ourselves as being for all of Wales, and what we mean by that is, much as anything is geographically, there was a feeling in some quarters that some of the existing Welsh media had a tendency to be a bit South Wales biased, naturally, because that's where the big conurbations are, Cardiff, Swansea, and Newport. And so we wanted to make sure that we were writing for an audience that could be anywhere in Wales, that it would be as relevant if you're in the north or the south, the east or the west. We do cover, as you say, politics. We are sort of quite serious in that sense. And when we launched, politics was absolutely at the heart of it, because we had Senedd elections coming up. So we were launched in the lead up to the Welsh elections, and that was very much a part of our initial mission, was to focus on those issues and try and explain what the Welsh Parliament is, what it does, and so on. We've evolved a bit from there, so that we perhaps a little bit broader in our coverage now, but politics is still important. And I think a sense of Welsh identity, being proud to live or work in Wales, whether you are Welsh born or someone who's moved to Wales or whatever, but a sense of pride in Wales. That, I suppose, that's where we see our audience: people who are who feel Welsh, who are proud to be in Wales and proud of the country, and who are engaged in its future. And that's I guess where we would see our potential readers.
And I think your political stance, in terms of you say you're a neutral title, is that right? So you're apolitical?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we have a strong focus on issues around Welsh culture and identity. We're very interested in the questions around independence and the future constitutional settlement, if you like, for Wales. But we're not party political, and we don't have a sort of pro-independence stance. Our sister title in Scotland, which has been going for a number of years, is a pro-independence title. That's who they are. That was the gap in the market that they saw, was that there was plenty of media in Scotland, but there wasn't much with a pro-indie stance. Our approach is different. We felt Wales is in a different place to Scotland in terms of the media landscape and the media market, and really, there's what we need here is just more strong media, serious media, people, news outlets that tell the news from a Welsh perspective, explain things to people, and we don't need to be taking one political view or another. That said, I mean, we do give quite a bit of coverage to issues around things like social justice, and the sort of sense of where things have been, people have perhaps been wronged, people have been badly treated, and so on. So those issues are important. They're political in a sense, but we're not party political.
Okay. And how does the National fit in with your Welsh portfolio? Because you have a number of titles in Wales. How do you stop them all treading on each other's toes?
Yeah, we do, and we work together. The model for the National is intertwined with those local titles. We will curate a lot of content from those local titles to use on the National as well. We work with with the rest of the team. Now, there is, I mean, from my point of view, my job is, I'm not just the editor of the National, I'm also the editor of South Wales Argus and some of our other local titles. So it's in my interest to cooperate with myself, if you see what I mean. Yes. It's not in my interest to fall out with myself over it, but it is important. We're trying to reach a different audience, so and take a slightly different business model as well. So the National will share stories that have been used on the Leader in Wrexham or on the Argus in Newport or the Telegraph in Pembrokeshire. But we're not really competing directly with them because those sites are very much for their location. We want our local sites to be the number one local news provider in those areas. So if you are in Haverfordwest and something happens, you turn to the Western Telegraph. The National is a slightly different proposition where we're trying to say, these are the issues that we think are important across Wales, and then within that there might be a really interesting story from Wrexham or from Newport or wherever, but we're not really fighting for the same audience because it's a different overall package.
On the National's website, Gavin, it says that our journey is at an early stage. Can you talk us through the planned journey and what you see as the key milestones, both past and present and indeed in the future?
Yes, so we launched on St. David's Day last year, so 1st of March last year. The journey obviously had begun sometime before that, and there was there's a lot of work went into getting to that point, but obviously getting out there was an absolute key milestone, and a lot of work went in the couple of weeks before that. I think we did what any good journalist would do, which is we gave ourselves a deadline that probably was more difficult to meet than we should have done, but we only get things done, don't we, when we've got a deadline to meet. So we launched on the 1st of March. Great response from people. People were very welcoming of our existence and our arrival. And year one was really about establishing our place and our brand, and people knowing that we existed, because that in itself is not the most straightforward thing to do. We don't have a huge marketing budget, so we promote the title through some of our local titles. We've done some paid promotion through social media channels and things like that, but a lot of it is just making your presence known. So that was very much the mission to start with, and also with the elections and the timing, as I touched on before, we wanted to make sure that we were playing a role in Welsh democracy, that we were highlighting, covering the elections for people who were interested in them in a digestible and easy to understand way, and explaining some of the things around the way it works and the voting system and who you're voting for and all those kind of things. So that was very much a key part. The elections then happened in May, and I think we probably took a little bit of time to work out where we fitted in post-election, because obviously the sort of surge in interest around the elections had dwindled a bit, and we had to sort of think about sort of where we fit, and also our business model, I suppose, because our goal was to be subscriptions driven. We want to, it's a subscriptions rather than a scale driven model. But I think one of the things we learned during that first year of being live, or first calendar year, is that subscriptions is our focus, but actually we also need to grow the audience too. I think in our initial conversations we didn't really talk about how many people reading the site. We looked at our sort of subscription number growing, but we realized we need more people to know we exist. We need more people to be reading our content, to be stumbling across it. It's the top of the funnel, if you like. So we've shifted our approach a little bit coming into this year, where growing our subscriptions will be absolutely crucial, but we want to grow the audience to what we sort of would see as a more sustainable level too. And we've got to have that dual focus, which is an interesting challenge, and it's not dissimilar to some of the familiar challenges to people who've been in the newspaper business, where you're trying to look at newspapers and online, and you've got slightly different goals, slightly different things you need to do for each of them. Actually, trying to grow numbers of views and subscribers at the same time is a similar sort of, they take slightly different approaches. So we're not going for big scale. That's never going to be our approach. There's no point. That's done very well. The likes of Wales Online have massive scale in Wales. Very successful. They do a lot of good journalism. It's a perfectly good model. That's not the model we're looking at. We're looking at a subscriptions funded model, but we just need to get enough size that the site is viable and sustainable. And that's really, in terms of our goals, our goal for this year is that we become self-funding, sustainable for the future. Because in year one, Newsquest invested money into getting us launched, and knew that it wouldn't see some of that money back. That was fine. That's what you do when you're investing in new products. But obviously, we've got to pay our way in the company, and make sure that the we are contributing to the business, and that there's a real strong future, that we can demonstrate that with the appetite in terms of the views and the subscribers.
So how are you increasing reach and subs at the same time? Because there is a potential conflict. So how are you managing to do both?
Yeah, there is, and we are a small team. The way our model works is that we have a very small core team who are producing the original content for the site, and also curating the sort of best content from Newsquest's 50 journalists on our local titles across Wales, as well as the local democracy reporter service and other agencies and so on. And that provides some of the kind of the volume or the kind of bulk around the site, to make it a vibrant and enjoyable news site to visit. For our core team, we're very much focusing on three, I would say, key themes this year, and they have slightly different purposes. The first one is very much, you touched on it yourself earlier, Welsh culture and identity. Any stories, any content features around those kind of issues appeal to our readership and will generally be well read. So that's the content that we're producing to grow our audience. As I say, it's not the mass scale growth. It's not the weather, sort of constant weather reports and traffic reports and how expensive properties and so on. That sort of stuff is well done elsewhere. We don't need to do that. But focusing on people's sense of Welshness, what makes them Welsh. We had some really well read stuff towards the end of last year on traditions and customs and so on around the Mary Lloyd, around Christmas and things like that. Different things that are very unique to Wales, but those things are very shareable as well. People are familiar with them, a bit nostalgic perhaps. People enjoy that kind of content, will share it through Facebook, and will grow our audience in that way. And then the stuff that we know that our existing subscribers really enjoy and engage with the most is often around the questions of independence or Wales' points of difference with England. Actually, quite a lot of interest in Scotland as well. We've found we've been able to make a bit more use of content from our sister titles up there, because there's some parallels around the agendas of self-governance and separation from England and so on. So those kind of issues, and also some of the more investigative pieces we've done around social justice. We've done pieces on MPs' second jobs, on coal tips, big issue in Wales, of the historical legacy of the mining industry, where unsafe coal tips sit above communities, and there is real concern that when it rains, what's going to happen is this, some of this going to collapse onto the communities below. So, we've done a lot of work on these areas, and those are the things that we feel will drive our subscriptions. They drive people to be engaged with the brand. They're the things that the people who are passionate about what we do want to see us doing and will support us for doing. Whereas the content more around culture and identity is more what people will share on their social media, and that helps us to grow our audience.
And in terms of converting this increased reach, or a percentage of the increased reach, what are your strategies there?
It's a little bit of a long game's probably medium game, shall we say, perhaps. So right now, the focus in the next couple of months is to be getting more people seeing and reading and engaging with that content. And we previously, almost anything that we'd been writing within the core team that we felt was good value content, we'd been putting behind our sort of premium gate, which is a tighter paywall. What we're doing now is a slight variation with that, with the content that we think is going to have the broader appeal. We're not putting that all behind the premium gate, at the moment because we want it to reach more people. But as we progress through the year, I think we will potentially look to tighten that up again. So as we get those people in and grow the audience, grow the reach, who are enjoying that content, then we will start to perhaps tighten the grading of that content so that it's under our sort of premium, which is effectively subscriber only. It's not quite. I think you might get a premium piece of content before you're then asked to register and then subscribe. But that's how we can sort of shift the balance a little bit, is the way we rate the content.
So at the moment, you're rating content on the type of content, as opposed to allowing people a certain number of articles before dropping the gate.
It's a bit of both. There's two levels of gate essentially. So there's sort of general content where people can read X number of articles per month, but then we have our premium content which is badged up and has a much tighter gate. So previously we were putting a lot of stuff as premium. We've kind of stepped back from that a little bit and said, okay, let's get more of it out there to people, but then we'll start to tighten it up a bit as we go forward, and once we've sort of grown that audience a bit more.
Now, with your first anniversary fast approaching, as you said, 1st of March, you might have touched on this already, but looking back on it, what have been the key lessons from year one?
So the one that I did mention, I think a key lesson from year one was you can't just focus on subscriptions. You need people to find your content too. People have got to be able to see it before they'll pay for it. So you've got to get it visible, and that is and will be always a challenge for any kind of news site, particularly when most news sites gain visibility by doing the highly shareable content that some people might use the term clickbait. That's a slightly misleading term, but when you're deliberately trying to differentiate yourself by not doing that content, finding other ways to make sure your content is very shareable, that's something we definitely needed to learn. So you've got to focus on how many people are reading it as well as just your pure subscriptions. Other lessons, I think when we launched, we did a launch print edition. It was hugely well received. So we then decided that it was worth taking the sort of pop-up print editions that we were doing into a weekly model. And so we published weekly until November, when we put a pause on that. And I think the lesson from that was, well, it was a hugely worthwhile exercise in getting the brand out there. If we hadn't launched with a print edition, we wouldn't have probably got half the coverage that we got, because someone launches a new website isn't that newsworthy in itself, but someone launching a new newspaper is newsworthy. So it was worthwhile doing, and we had lots of really loyal readers, and it was a wonderful thing to see people tweeting pictures of themselves buying the paper on a Saturday morning, and people who hadn't bought a paper for years or never bought a paper saying we're buying this paper because we sort of feel this sense of identity. The challenge with it is it's very expensive, and it is in a sense a distraction. So we doing the paper every week, as anyone who's worked in a newsroom where you produce newspapers will know, the paper starts to pull the focus because it's the thing that has to happen. And actually our long-term future has always been digital, so we need to keep that focus on digital primarily. Print is a wonderful platform and has its place, but we probably put maybe a bit too much time into print in the first year, and when we needed to be focusing, when you've got small team, limited resources, you've got to focus on what you can do really well. And I think that's something that we sort of learned towards the end. The print was loved, and I'm very proud of it, but it's digital is always the future, was always the plan for this brand, so that's where we need to be focusing.
Did you see a role for future for print in the future for the National, or do you think that's been and gone?
I think it still does. We've talked about a few different approaches. Pop-up editions, which is where we started. Going back to pop-up editions, I think we would probably look to coincide those perhaps around events where you've got a large footfall of people and you've got a a potential market audience there. Things like the Royal Welsh Show, for example, that kind of thing, where maybe you've got several thousand people going to be in one place. You can produce some content that's a little bit more bespoke to them and use it as a big marketing tool for the brand. But also you've got that audience there, so you can sell, you sell advertising or sponsorship and things around it, but in a more targeted way. The other sort of potential option we could look at, I mean, I'm very interested in when you see organizations like Byline Times. I don't know if you've done anything on them in the past, but they're a print newspaper publisher, but they're on a subscription sort of, you get it, you pay for it and it gets delivered to you. So they're only printing the number of copies that they're going to sell effectively. I think that's really interesting. I think I can't see us doing that at this time, but I could see that being the sort of model that, 3-4 years down the line, if the demand was there, it's the sort of thing that you could look at, rather than having that big overhead of having to print lots of copies and distribute them all across the country, because we wanted the paper to be all across Wales, not just in the sort of more heavily populated southern area. It was really important to us that you could get it anywhere in Wales, and that is not a cheap exercise when you're trying to get it delivered everywhere.
Now, Gavin, digital subs are obviously a key part of your business model or your business strategy. Um, from what you've learned in the first year, what are the key do's and don'ts of building a subspace? I think you've already touched on the reach issue, but have any particular tactics worked well for you over the last year?
Yeah, I think something we need to do more of, actually, but that we have seen success in, is talking about ourselves. It's not something that's natural to journalists because we're used to writing about other people. But actually, some of our stories that would generate the most subscriptions were when we wrote about ourselves and what we were doing. So we need to do that more. Our biggest push in subscriptions was when we launched. The first month we got a large number of subscriptions proportionately. Our second biggest month was the month when we stopped print. So we
Interesting.
saw a number of people who perhaps thought, okay, I've been reading it in print, I'll try it. We launched an app at the same time, so to give a better reader experience. So we saw people who thought, well, let's give that a go, try that. But also we were talking about it. We were talking about it, other people were talking about it. So not being afraid to talk about yourselves and ask people. If you don't ask people to subscribe, then they won't just do it out of their own goodwill. You've got to have that communication. I mean, it sounds obvious, but it's not something that comes naturally to journalists to do, to be sort of asking for money or asking for support. But definitely really important, and just learning who your subscribers are and what they're interested in. The people will pay for things that they feel give them value and give them perhaps something someone else isn't providing. And it's finding those needs that you can meet that others can't. And it's not always obvious. Sometimes you think, okay, we think there's a potential market here. One of the areas that we looked at was, there's not a great deal of coverage in the media of the Welsh football leagues, the bigger clubs in Wales playing in the English league, but the Welsh football leagues, we thought there's a potential market in there. So we focused quite a lot on coverage of that for a number of months. We haven't seen that turn into subscriptions. So we thought there's a market there. It's not being well served. That might work. Hasn't really translated into subscription numbers. So you've got to be prepared to think, okay, we'll try that, see if it works. If it's not, then maybe we need to focus on something else, because we don't have endless resources. So not every market you identify will work out, but it's just trying to hone what your readers are interested in. And obviously you can use your analytics to see what your subscribers are reading, as well as what your other readers are reading, and just remembering that and bringing those conversations into your daily news conferences. Have a focus. Why are we writing this content? What's it for? Who is it for? And being really focused on that.
And I noticed, I think one of your journalists is planning a trip to America. Is that right? Or and there was, yeah, I think it was, please fund the trip. Was that right?
I
That was one
think
of your approaches.
it was
Did it
more of,
work?
yeah, it was more of a wishful plea from her point of view after, yes, discovering, like anywhere in the UK, there are of course lots of places in America that share names, and I think she just stumbled across Wales in Utah, and was she's very active on Twitter. And was putting it out there, that it would be good to go out there and visit. I don't think that's likely to happen, but if we see a huge flood in subscribers demanding it and investing in it, then we'll certainly have a look.
Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice? Now, in terms of business viability, as you say, you're year one. You know, you're growing. In terms of subs numbers and targets, where do you ultimately need to be? Do you think on the numbers game?
Yeah, in terms of numbers, we the way that I the very broad, very rough maths that I look at is if you have around 500 paying subscribers, that pays for a journalist. I mean, it's not as straightforward as that, but so if you've got 500 subscribers throughout the year, that will pay for a journalist more or less. So that's that's the sort of the starting point. So therefore, once you're at sort of 2,000 subscribers, then you're potentially paying four salaries or thereabouts in terms of journalists. So we haven't sort of shared or published targets at the moment, but I think that's for me, when I look at the sustainability on the site, what I'm looking at is how many staff would we like to have? How many staff do we have? How many staff would we like to have? And at what point are we through subscriptions funding those staff, because there's other income in the site as well. There's obviously some advertising and commercial partnerships and the sort of scale that you get from page views. But what I'd like to be is in a position where this is a site that is the staff that we have are funded through the digital subscriptions, through the reader revenue, because that I think gives you a really strong, robust model, and it also gives, from our publisher's point of view, a different perspective, because Newsquest has gone into subscriptions in the past 12 months, or so, during the probably past 18 months during the pandemic. But it's not been that was a new thing for Newsquest, and most of our sites will be very much primarily page view driven. So if we can establish and prove that there is a viable model where you can have a dedicated, team with maybe not huge numbers, but with kind of handful of journalists, solely funded through your subscriptions, then actually I think that's strategically a really important thing for the wider business as well, to have that within its armory.
Are the early signs good in terms of that aspiration? Do you see it heading in that direction?
Yeah, we're not there yet, but I think we're definitely heading in the right direction, and it's a constant. The challenge with subscriptions is it's a constant battle to the number we look at is the active subscribers, not the total number of people who have subscribed, because obviously not everyone stays with you. People cancel, people's cards expire, all kinds of things. So you've got to be growing that number. Now we've grown every month since we launched. We've had sort of points where it's kind of grown quickly, and then other months where it's grown very slightly. But we're continuing that momentum and that growth. I think a key month for us will be March, because we got a lot of new subscribers in March. We've got quite a lot of annual subscribers, which is great, because it's the people who are bought in to what we're doing and the mission, and they're subscribing because they think this is important. We've obviously got to retain those, so we've got to make sure we're giving them what they want, and that come that kind of first few weeks of March, first 2 or 3 weeks of March, those people who supported us last year think, actually, yes, this is worth continuing with. I'm pleased that I've lent this organisation my support, that I'm helping to fund these journalists because of the important work they're doing. And a really important part of that will be around us communicating between now and then about the value of what we're doing, and reminding people of some of the important stories that we're doing, as well as the producing great, enjoyable content for them to read.
Now, I believe you recently launched a number of new newsletters. Can you talk us through your newsletter strategy? What's the thinking behind them, and any early learnings?
Yeah, so it's an ongoing process. We've launched. We sort of announced that we were launching 4 new newsletters. We've launched a couple of them. We've got a couple of them we're hoping to get underway this month, and that actually very much ties into what I was saying before about retaining those subscribers. It's about making sure that we're having that direct relationship. If we can get our subscribers reading newsletters and they're opening them and reading them, doesn't necessarily matter if they click through on the stories. If they feel they get value from the newsletter, that's the important thing. Then they're more likely to stay with us when their renewal comes around, because they're seeing something from us. They're thinking, oh yeah, get great value from that. I think the different newsletters we've launched or are launching have slightly different purposes. So one of the newsletters that we launched was really a replacement for the paper going on the newsstands on a Saturday morning. Was just really a way of saying, if you like your content curated, then you can sign up to this newsletter, and it's there for you. We've chosen the top 10 stories that we think you should be reading today, with a little introduction from myself. But it's really about saying, here's a broad mix of the things that we're covering that we think are the most important. If you don't want to find it for yourself, you can sign up here and do that. Other ones will be a little bit different. So one of the newsletters that we haven't launched yet, but that we will be, is focusing on those social justice issues in Wales. And that's one of our reporters is very strong on that area. Now, what I'll be looking for from her in the newsletter that she'll be providing is less a curation of, here are the best stories of this on this topic, but perhaps a little bit more of a peek behind the scenes, because people, I think, will be interested in what goes into her journalism and some of her colleagues. So those who sign up to the newsletter, who are, the people who read her work, are often subscribers. They're often people who are engaged in the mission, if you like, of what we're trying to do. So for them, the value they will get is not just being able to get a weekly synopsis of, this is the stories you might be interested in, but also a little bit of insight into the process, a little bit of a peek behind the curtain. So it's just giving people value in different ways, and just finding ways to basically touch base. That's a terrible phrase, isn't it? Keep in touch with our readers, communicate with them, and remind them of why they subscribed, so that when it comes around to their renewals, then it's less of a thought process for them. They already know they get good value from it.
Now, Gavin, winding the clock back a bit, you were, I believe, business editor at the Bristol Post for a number of years. I'd be interested in your views on the state of business coverage in the press as a whole, and whether you see that as an opportunity.
Yeah, business is a. I mean, I've sort of covered business at a couple of stints in my career, and I think there is one of the interesting things around business journalism in regional or local journalism was always that it didn't fit into the boxes of how performance and audiences were measured. So as local newspapers went online, as we started to measure things like page views rather than the newspaper sales and so on, business journalism doesn't fit well into a scale approach. It's about value and relationships, and it's a slightly different thing. And that was always one of the challenge, I think, when we saw lots of our local titles did away with their business editors and things over the years, because they didn't fit in. They weren't providing the large page view numbers, because the only times business stories tend to do that is when they're not really business stories, but they're actually consumer stories, or they're food and drink stories. A business story about a new restaurant opening will do well because people are interested in going to the restaurant, but it's less the B2B side of it. So I think business is a really interesting area. It's something that with the national we've sort of dabbled in a little bit, and I think there's definitely potential to do more, but it involves stepping slightly out of the main thrust of what we're doing. So it's not something that we're pushing quite as much right now, but it's something we may well come back to, because I think it's good business journalism provides value, and it definitely fits with the potential of a subscription model, but it is a more competitive field. There are more people doing B2B type journalism. So whereas the local papers and things perhaps moved away from it, lots of the more publishers in the sort of, well, the more B2B space, so you've got your insiders and various other sort of publications who will target that more pure business audience. So it's a little bit harder, I think, to turn that into a successful subscriptions model unless you've got real valuable insight information that no one else had, because you've got too much competition.
Now looking at stepping back and looking at the regional press sector as a whole, where do you think publishers in general should be focusing their efforts and resources in the next few years?
I think it's been a really interesting last few months in the regional press. We've seen a real turnaround from years and years of teams getting smaller every year to actually quite a lot of hiring and things in the past year. And there's been I think a change in perhaps faith in the sector. I think we've reached a bit of a tipping point in a number of the publishers where actually the growth is starting from new areas, and audience growth is starting to offset the declines. The companies will be smaller than they were 10 years ago, but they're starting to become growth businesses again, and that's really exciting. The focus is very much on audience and content. I mean, in Newsquest, the chief executive and the board at Newsquest will be far more interested in content than any board level chief execs and things that I would have known in the past in media companies. And that's because it's so much more important to the business now, because the revenues come through audiences. So the audience performance becomes the most important driver for whether the business is a success. So we've seen investment in content and in content producing staff across lots of organizations, not just Newsquest. Reach and others have been very much investing too. And I think we will see that continue. I don't think there'll be wholesale, reckless throwing money around, sort of hiring sprees, but I think we'll continue to see targeted investment on certain things. Where do we think there's potential to grow the audience? We've certainly at Newsquest, we've made quite a lot of changes in the past few months where the central team that supports the local newsroom has had quite a lot of change, quite a lot of investment, but a lot more focus on what it's doing. And that is helping to drive and support performance in the local newsrooms. So I think we'll continue to see that kind of investment. I think you'll see, we've got new things coming through. Google Showcase, try that again. Google Showcase has been around for a little while now, but that's expanding to more titles. Not sure we've seen the best use of it yet in terms of driving audience, but it has a monetary value to publishers through licensing arrangements with Google and so on. Those kind of things will be important. I think we will see more pictures becoming ever more important. I think if you look at the regional press as a whole, photography was something that was all but done away with in terms of professionals doing it. But actually, because you could find images online, reporters can take pictures on their camera, but the quality of images is becoming more important as people engage through social media, and particularly Instagram, but also people are expecting a higher quality on Facebook now. If you're scrolling through a feed, a good quality image makes you stop and look in a way that a poor quality image doesn't. So that becomes more important, and I think that we'll start to see more emphasis on that. That doesn't necessarily mean hiring lots of photographers, but perhaps more focus on training our journalists to be able to take good pictures, not just that anything will do, and also more on the scene reporting. And that's something that at Newsquest we really, really value on our local titles, getting our reporters to the scene of things so that you can take pictures, but also just adding, showing that we're out there in our communities, that we are the place to go for news in that area, because we're there, we're on the scene, whether that be a sort of breaking news incident or a restaurant opening or whatever it might be. Getting out, being on the scene, I think is going to be really important, because that's what differentiates you from someone stuck in their bedroom 200 miles away.
Now you mentioned there, Gavin, some changes in the central teams at Newsquest. Well, in broad terms, what kind of changes were those?
So there'll be other people better placed to sort of talk about this than me. But in broad terms, we had a structure previously where within our central team there would perhaps be someone dedicated to supporting a particular region. With everything, with it's all about improving standards. So they would be trying to help people improve their social media, improve their headlines, improve their SEO, and all those kind of things. And we really restructured the central team so that we have specialists, so that we have a couple of people who are specializing in social media who will talk to the local newsrooms and run sessions with them on how to do A, B, and C more effectively. We'll have SEO specialists. We've got an SEO team of journalists now who provide central content for all our newsrooms, so that our local reporters are focused on the local news. The central SEO team will produce some of that content that has the potential to bring people into the funnel if they're searching for things, which might be that such and such a band is on tour and they're playing in Cardiff and Newcastle and Portsmouth and wherever else, and they can do that story for all the relevant sites, that sort of thing. But it's freeing up the local reporters to then be able to do local news, to be getting out to the scene, as I was saying before, and really being the place for local news in their particular community.
And plans for the national over the next year? I mean, you touched on a few things, but anything in the pipeline which you haven't mentioned?
Plans for the coming year, very much making a bit of a song and dance around our anniversary in March, encouraging people to support us, reminding people of what we've done. A focus on those three subject areas that I touched on. So really focusing in terms of the original content we're producing on issues around culture and identity, on issues around independence and self-governance and devolution, and on social justice, and the issues around and stories and investigations and so on around that. So that's our main sort of content focus. And then there are lots of interesting things we're looking at. Not everything that I can share at the moment. We will look at the right time to return for sort of to print for pop-up editions, and so on. So we may well do that at points this year, but only if it's the right time in terms of the economy, in terms of events taking place, and that it's not going to distract from the core mission, but support it. And then really just galvanizing the team. We've got a really talented team. I'm really so impressed with the small team of journalists we have in our sort of dedicated core team, and really galvanizing them and kind of unleashing them to do brilliant work, empowering them to do that, while we fill in the gaps around them with all the content we can bring from elsewhere, but continuing to keep that very clear Welsh perspective in what we do.
Excited about the future?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think it is a really exciting time to be in journalism, to be in regional journalism as well, with the South Wales Argus and our other titles. Very excited for the year ahead with those. But yeah, the national. I think this is the year where we need to. We've made it. We launched. We here we are. We told everyone about where we are. Now we've got to sort of find our real personality and deliver what we can, so that come the end of the year we can look back and say, yeah, everybody knows what the National in Wales is, what we're about, and look at these fantastic stories that we've done that feed into that.
Very exciting. Very exciting. Now, Gavin, just finally, a question we ask all our guests on the podcast. Outside of work, how do you relax?
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day, having listened to some of your podcasts before. Not enough, I think, is probably a common answer. I think for me, there's a few things. I'm very fortunate that the person whom I enjoy the company of most in the world happens to be my wife. So just kind of spending time together is an important way that that I kind of relax outside of work. We never run out of things to say, so that's always a joy. We are possibly about to get a couple of dogs in the household, so that will be that will be, well, I don't know if it'll be relaxing or not, but it'll certainly be distracting.
Well, it'll get you out of the house anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing on a personal level for me is looking forward to hopefully getting to watch some cricket this year. So in the past, I've recent years I've followed Somerset, so I've got a Glamorgan membership for the first time this year. So looking forward to getting into Cardiff and watching a bit of cricket, COVID
So
and everything else permitting.
Do you support the English cricket team or the Welsh cricket team?
Well, there is the English cricket team is the Welsh cricket team in that sense. It's an odd setup. Wales kind of is part of the England and Wales cricket board. So, but I will be looking forward to supporting Glamorgan and seeing how they can. I mean, they had a good year last year actually, so hopefully they can repeat some of that success this year.
One final question: your thoughts on the Ashes series?
Gosh, not really a surprise, but thoroughly depressing. I think. I think it's a good lesson in business, though, isn't it? If you do absolutely no preparation, and go against the sort of toughest marketplace competition in the world, then you're going to get hammered.
Well, lesson there. Gavin Thompson, thank you very much for being our guest on the In Publishing podcast.
Thank you.
A final word from our valued podcast sponsor. Air Business is trusted by 4,000 publications and 3 million happy subscribers, with 10 million customer records on file. It processes £500 million each year in 22 currencies and delivers over 300 million items. Find out more at airbusiness.com. Many thanks to Gavin for being our guest this time. As the National approaches its first anniversary, it faces a nail-biting time as the first cohort of digital subscribers comes up for renewal. It's a serious-minded and intelligent title, so I hope the renewal rate is high. You can see the site for yourself and sign up to its newsletters at www.thenational.wales. And you can follow Gavin on Twitter, where his handle is @Gavin_Thompson1. For more information about us and to listen to previous podcasts, please go to our website, inpublishing.co.uk. Thank you for listening. We'll be back in a few weeks' time for another podcast. Bye for now.